I bet if I flipped a coin, more than half of you would admit when it comes to career success, you intrinsically tie that to your overall identity as a person. If you answered yes, you're not alone, because according to Gallup, between 39 and 55% of today's modern American workforce admits that success in their job and career is central to their overall identity. Furthermore, 2026 research from McKinsey Company reveals 85% of today's CEOs feel that they need more support both personally and professionally to be successful, particularly during organizational changes. And finally, only 13% of our most senior leaders feel prepared to manage widespread change. More and more leaders today are working with a support system which includes an executive leadership coach or tailored transition plans to navigate those uncertain and aspirational periods of hope and change inside an organization, according to my friends over at Forbes. This is all good news for my friend Chip Scholz. He's an internationally recognized executive coach, author, and leadership strategist. He's got a grounded approach and deep insights when it comes to leadership, structuring a thriving organizational culture, so much so that he's developed his work around 5C key principles, which include clarity, context, conditioning, character, and choice. He's concerned about the question of how people evolve, change, and eventually let go with over 30 years of experience of navigating organizations and executives through the choppy waters of uncertainty, transition, and growth. He's on a mission now to make sure leaders know effective leadership doesn't always mean you have to have all the answers and having the ability to evolve and delegate the pressure of coming up with all of the answers to getting to how 2 plus 2 equals 4 inside the walls of an organization is the true sign of growth. And he joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. A moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to talk to you about executive leadership, coaching, and organizational culture. Great to see you on this Friday, and thanks so much for being here, my friend.
I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Chip, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you about how do you think we can rethink the definition of building a thriving organizational culture, because with societal pressure and workplace demands, everyone's definition of organizational culture is different. And I'm wondering if you could share your view on how to build a thriving organizational culture in today's modern context. My friend, what are your thoughts then?
Well, I've worked with a number of organizations, some that have great cultures and some that have not so great cultures. And I think the most successful cultures that I've run into have one thing that holds them together, and it's a people orientation. So what I say, the best cultures that I work with are people oriented, performance driven. So they're people oriented. They think about people first. And then, because they're not a PTA, they're not a nonprofit. They also have to think about performance. They have to make the bills and satisfy the owners or the shareholders or whatever. But it's got to be people first. And so many times, especially with publicly held corporations, you see the profit motive getting in the way of taking care of the people.
Yeah, when you talk about leadership being a personal choice over a position, Jeff, I strongly believe that if you invest in people and allow them the autonomy to make decisions that affect the entirety of the organization, they're more invested in the process of a positive outcome. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the idea of leadership being a personal choice, because there are all different types of bad and effective leadership. So tell me your thoughts on the importance of investing in your people and giving them autonomy, my friend. What are your thoughts then?
Well, I think that's absolutely right on, Kevin. I think you nailed it. Here's my take on it: is that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. So what does that really mean? Well, that means that you've got to know what you want to do, and I have a framework that I use in my coaching that talks about that, and the framework is the 5 C's. It's context, clarity, conditioning, choice, and character. So context is being aware of who you are, being aware of what your situation is. Clarity is being sure in no uncertain terms what you want. Conditioning is getting your mind right, getting to think about the right things. Choices is choosing the right behaviors, and character is putting it all together. It's walking the talk, and so self leadership is so important to show up authentically. Because here's the thing: we see so many people, and I'm sure you've seen it too. Uh, we've seen so many people with imposter syndrome, and with imposter syndrome, you don't really believe you should be there. It's kind of like what they used to call a post turtle. A post turtle was a turtle that was sitting up on a fence post, and you knew that the turtle didn't get there by himself, and you're not really sure that the turtle should have been there in the first place. So imposter syndrome is like being a post turtle, and what that leads to is a lot of having to represent yourself as something that you're not, and not be authentic. Well, if you're not authentic, people can smell it a mile off, and all of a sudden that leads to some bad behaviors. So, the first thing is you can't lead others till you lead yourself. The second thing is we get tied up in a way of doing rather than a way of being. So I work with a bunch of architects, engineers, people that are professionals, people that have advanced degrees in construction and MBAs and all that kind of stuff. And if you think about it, most of our life, we're valued for what we do. We're not valued for who we are. And when you go into leadership, you get valued for who you are, not for what you do. And what happens is when somebody becomes a new leader, or even somebody that's been around leadership for a while, they get so tied up in what they're doing, so tied up in having to be the smartest person in the room, that they never get around to leading with heart, leading with intention, leading with people first. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, I also wanted to touch on the whole concept of expectations, because all too often, leaders they have measuring sticks for the people that they're in charge of leading, but sometimes they forget to hold themselves accountable. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the importance of leadership accountability and making sure that leaders know that that employees know that leaders are also willing to hold themselves accountable. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great thing because if someone lacks personal accountability, you can smell it a mile off, and those are the people you just don't want to work with anymore. Those are the people that you just are not going to enjoy being with. Um, but here's the thing. So, from an employee basis, um, I think it's so important for a leader to have clear expectations of the people that are working for them. I also think it's so important for the people to have clear expectations of the leader. However, if you have clear expectations for the leader and you never mention it, you never say what those expectations are, then what good are they? I mean, you may have all kinds of expectations of someone, but if you never let them know about it, what good is that? What good is that avoiding the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a two-way street. It's if you're working for me, I'm going to give you clear expectations. I'm going to make sure that you know exactly what's expected of you. I think it should be the other way around too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, building on that, I know that you believe that culture doesn't change when policies do. It changes when people recognize sort of the error of their own ways and they want to change for the better. And, people centered leadership, I think, is the best type of leadership because you can show that you're human. So I'm curious about your message to leaders about the importance of forming a great culture where everyone, feels like they have a stake in the game because if they don't, then they're not going to give you their best effort. So talk to me about creating a good culture where everyone feels valued and respected. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, creating a culture, I mean, you get the culture that you have, whether you want it or not. And it's a formative process. It's not something that you can just magically, especially if a company's been around for a long time, it's not something you can magically, snatch from the air and say, "Hey, we've got a great culture now." So it is definitely a process, and it's definitely a process that hits the three dimensions of systemic, extrinsic, intrinsic. So systemic is what are the policies and procedures? What are the things that you believe? It's having a strong set of core values. It's having a strong vision in the company, and that's some of the structural elements, and then having the policies and procedures that support that vision, support those values, and don't go against those values. From the extrinsic, it's making sure that you're walking the talk, and that you're providing the training and the development opportunities, that you're providing the benefit structure that helps people thrive. And then intrinsically, it's how are you dealing with people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the best story that I ever heard was one that was told to me years ago, and it was about a company that had decided to um, present their new core values, and they talked at length about their core values. They talked about the do's and the don'ts of their core values. So one of the do's was to treat everyone with respect. And the president of the company made this presentation in front of all the workers, and told them about, hey, this is the way we're going to handle things. And he walked off stage and walked around the corner, and there was a supervisor berating one of the hourly associates. And so he walked up and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the supervisor said, "Hey, wait just a second, I got to deal with this." And he pulled the supervisor aside and he said, "No, we just talked about this. You're going to treat them with respect." And he said, "Yeah, but I got to deal with these knuckleheads." And he fired the guy. Well, that went through the whole organization that they were serious about what they were putting down, and that, you know, that says a lot. So you've got to, aside from dealing with the systemic, extrinsic, intrinsic parts, you've got to you've got to be serious about it, and you've got to really uphold it, and you got to live it, because nothing stinks worse than you putting out a bunch of values and then not living up to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chip, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the on this finding, my friend from Stanford University, that reported that nearly two-thirds of CEOs do not receive the outside leadership advice that they crave, my friend. This is coming from the Stanford University Center for Leadership Development and Research. And they say that today's leaders are sort of craving, outside advice to validate their decisions. And I wonder your thoughts on those findings, my friend.
Well, so what I found over the years, all I can speak to is my own experience. What I found over the years is that the CEO spot is the loneliest spot on the totem pole, and they don't really have anybody to talk to, because they can't talk to the people that work for them, because they all have their own opinions. They can't talk to their golf buddies, or because their golf buddies all have an opinion. They can't talk to their spouses, because their spouses will probably look at them and say, "God, are you coming up with that again?" So who are they going to turn to? Well, in my experience as a coach that has worked with a number of leaders and a number of CEOs over the years, um, yeah, a coach is that sounding board. A coach is the one that provides the leadership development. But if you're a CEO, you've probably been through all kinds of leadership development courses. Now it's how do you put that in action? How do you maintain the course? How do you build the things that you want to build? And a good coach. I'm not trying to blow my own horn or promote. I just think a good coach is essential. And here's the thing. I got told by several people that were CEOs of companies who said, I can talk to you because you don't have skin in the game. I wasn't a shareholder. I wasn't a board member. I wasn't an employee. Um, I was a trusted advisor who provided that kind of good feedback to someone that has their butt kissed all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jeff, I also wanted to talk to you about employee engagement in two facets, because I believe that you have to be able to meet people where they are and sort of have a compassion, what I call a compassion for a life circumstance. If people are going through things at home or in their view of society, it'll affect their work performance. And I know that, there's a bottom line that me as a leader or an executive, but I also know that there is a space to make sure that people can feel that they can express themselves without fear of retribution. And then I also wanted to ask you about the importance of not being so rigid, going off our last discussion, that leaders are so compromised in their ability to accept advice. You can take that two-part question in any direction you wish, my friend.
Well, that's it, and you covered a lot of ground, Kevin. So thanks, and I'll attempt to kind of bridge that gap. Um, that is where what you do and what you say either match up or don't. So if I'm an employee and I've had a difficult time, my wife has been ill, my kids are ill, or on the other hand, my kids are getting married, or some joyous event. The true factor of whether a company is believing what they're putting out is, can I have the grace to deal with what I need to deal with? Are you, as a supervisor, as a leader, as a person who's I'm responsible to, but who's responsible for my caring and well-being? Are you, as a leader, willing to be empathetic enough to say, hey, this person needs grace? And I've had a situation that, a couple of them that I've known really well, where someone was dying of cancer, and there was so much grace extended that it was so refreshing to see that people were actually doing what they said they were going to do, and that's employee engagement. I would imagine that most organizations are are giving some kind of engagement. I hope that they're giving some kind of engagement survey. I deal with one organization that uses the Gallup 12, the 12 questions, like, do I have everything I need to do my job, and that kind of thing. I think that is a great measure of the health of the company. And what I mean by that is, so Gallup is great about having comparisons with industries, comparison with the population at large. If you take a look at the Gallup results writ large, it shows that a huge number of employees are engaged, are disengaged, and then if you take a look at each company's results, you can see more or less, are they following that trend, or are they going the opposite way? And the company that I'm talking about, man, their engagement is so much better than the average. Um, that means they're doing things right.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, I wanted to talk about your book, Small Decisions and Big Shifts, where you help people navigating life and leadership on their own terms, my friend. Because I believe that small decisions can have big impact, like you do. And I'll give you the space to tell me all about your book, my friend.
Yeah. And let me just go back. I wrote a couple of books with other people in 2009 and 2011, and in 2012 I had a stroke, and the stroke was, it was a huge wake up call, but I had some cognitive deficits coming out of the stroke, and I always wanted to write my own book, with me as the sole author. And so I started writing, and I didn't really like the work product, so I stuck it in a drawer for about 5 years. And then my kids gave me Storyworth for Father's Day. And Storyworth is a platform that it asks you a question once a week, and at the end of a year, they print a book and they send it to you. So over the course of a year, I wrote 60 stories. The book ended up being 411 pages. And so it's all personal stories. It's all stories about growing up, and what my dad was like, what my mom was like, what my grandparents were like, who I took to prom, that kind of thing. So that got me back into the store, into writing mode, and so small decisions, big shifts. I finished the manuscript in December of 24. It was published October 25, and it describes my coaching philosophy. So when I was talking about the 5 C's before, that's the framework that is in the book, and I wrote it as a personal book, with my experiences in there, and filled it with a lot of concepts. One of the concepts that's near and dear to my heart that I use quite often is through a company called Target Training International (TTI), and their assessment tools. And so assessment tools can tell us so much about who we are and our making our way in the world. And so I've gotten I wrote part of that, but it's just the whole thing. It's look, if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others, and this is a book about leading yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about leading yourself, and I know that you work with senior leaders in companies who are going through transition, growth, and sort of a recalibration. And, depending on the industry or company that you're leading, that can work differently depending on the lens that you're looking at it through. So I'm curious to ask you about how do you think we navigate transition and sort of recalibration successfully in today's modern society? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
I would be remiss in making a commentary on society writ large, but in my own experience, transition is going to happen, change is going to happen. You can't avoid it. And whether it's growing older or not growing older or whatever, there's all kinds of change. Everything changes. You may not notice those changes if you're in your own little pocket of the world, but everything changes. So, one of one of my philosophies is semper gumby, which is Semper is always, and Gumby is this little claymation character. It's one that I like to use that is very flexible. And so Semper Gumby to me is always flexible. And so if you take that tack that you gotta flex whatever comes. Um, that's how you handle transitions. Some transitions are great. Some transitions are not so great. Uh, but the only difference is how you take them. I mean, Kevin, you know this. You can't control much in life. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you handle it.
Hmm.
And so that's the important part is how you handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I ask you my next question, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a personal story. Uh,
Okay.
when I was born with cerebral palsy, and at the age of 9, I was told that I would never walk without assistance because of the severity of my disability. And when I turned 22 and graduated college about 15 years ago, it took me 6.5 years to get my first paying job because at the time in the news industry, so I went to school originally to become a sports reporter, and I went on 10 consecutive job interviews, and news directors would tell me you're qualified, but because of your disability, we don't believe we have the resources to assist you in the newsroom. So I made a career pivot when I was 24, and I started my own public speaking business. And I now work with organizations to amplify the hiring of folks with disabilities. And I'm curious, based on your executive leadership experience, how do you think hiring folks with disabilities and giving them a chance to really show their mettle in the workforce can be a competitive advantage for organizational culture? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
If you're qualified, you're qualified.
Yeah.
If you're qualified to do the job, if you can handle the physicality of a job, if a job requires physical presence and the ability to do things, that's fine. But my goodness, I I don't see any difference from anybody else in being able to do a job. And does that make sense? I just, you
Yeah.
know, Kevin, you seem like a very capable and accomplished person.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also think it's important to show a diversity of thinking in the hiring and recruiting process. And I wonder your thoughts on how we can rethink sort of the recruiting and sort of the talent acquisition process as well. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's taking a look at the way that we think about things and call it biases or call it whatever we are. But it's taking a look at how we think about certain things, certain class of individuals, certain disabilities or that kind of thing. And I've noticed over the years that the best organizations, the most profitable organizations, the ones that you really like to work at, are the ones that embrace diversity. Now, I don't mean diversity, that black and white and brown and that kind of thing. I'm talking about diversity of thought. I'm talking about diversity of ability. I'm talking about diversity of more than that not a quota system, but do we have people that can do the job no matter of what particular issue that they're facing, and that's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Chip, I wanted your thoughts on this report from CNBC because we talked about empathetic leadership earlier. And this report found that 68% of today's CEOs and leaders believe that they are more empathetic than they were before the pandemic than they are now. But, employee perception it differs because 71% of US CEOs also report experiencing imposter syndrome, as we talked about earlier. And I wonder your thoughts on whether you think, CEOs are becoming more empathetic. Are they more empathetic? And where do you think the disconnect lies in empathetic leadership when it comes to the perception of CEOs versus their employees? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
I can't really talk about the broad swath of corporate life. All I can do is share my experience, and my experience has been with privately held businesses, people that own a company, not shareholders that own a company. And so, if we take a look at who works for family business, the bulk of employees work for family businesses. They don't work for public held corporations. Um, but in my experience, the people that I'm dealing with are extremely empathetic, and there's such a different vibe with family businesses. There's such a vibe of caring and it's almost it's almost like an extension of the family with the employees. And so I don't think that they're more empathetic or less empathetic. And the answer may change when you start to get to the economy writ large. But in my experience, God, they're extremely empathetic, and their employees feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a matter of a perspective and a matter of choice when it comes to leadership styles, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like I said, the best cultures that I work with are the ones that are people driven and are people oriented and performance driven.
Yeah,
And that you can't just say people first. You
absolutely.
have to say that it is people oriented and mean it.
Absolutely. To that point, Chip, I was wondering if you think there's a difference between being important and being, useful in terms of in the eyes of your employees, because there's a difference between having a title and actually executing it or having the discipline to see. So sometimes when you're at the top of the ladder, you also have to show the employees that you're in charge of leading that you're willing to extend a hand. Don't you? Do you think there's a difference between being important and being useful in organizational culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the biggest thing that I see that causes organizations to have issues are when the leaders of the organization start to believe their own bullshit. Because when they believe their own press, they own their own PR, when they believe that they're the most important person in the world, bad things happen. And so I've seen CEOs that just can't let their position go, that should have retired a long time ago or moved on or changed jobs, but they hang on, and all of a sudden incidents happen, things go awry, and they just start to believe their own press. There's a word for that. It's called hubris, which means that really you believe in your own stuff. But it's I think that is the hardest thing to realize as a leader, is how do you avoid, when you're getting your butt kissed by so many people, how do you avoid feeling like you're the best thing since sliced bread?
Mm-hmm.
And I, you know, I've seen some leaders that are very successful at it, and I've seen some leaders that get sucked into that, and all of a sudden they are the best. And it's any more than watching a political leader who has been so out of touch with what the individual does, that they don't know what a scanner is at a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody who's just been cloistered and is being fed a lot of stuff that just may or may not be true, but it may be the way they think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, I've got three questions left for you. And the first of
Okay.
those three questions is this, my friend. I wanted to ask you about employee mental health because Inc.com and Inc. magazine, they released a study last year that said that 60 to 80% of U.S. employers and CEOs now view, employee mental health as the top priority or a core company priority to success. By friend, and they feel more compelled to put resources behind mental health at work. And then finally, 58% of CEOs, they agree that employee well-being is critical to organizational financial success. And I'm wondering your thoughts on whether you acknowledge or you accept that as a premise, my friend.
Well, I think mental health is extremely important, but I'm not qualified to talk about mental health. I'm not a therapist. In fact, I haven't even played one on TV. But yes. So we're coming from a place, and this is, I think this is interesting. There was a book that was written in 1910 by a guy named Frederick Winslow Taylor. And Frederick Winslow Taylor wrote this book called Scientific Management. And in it, he wrote, "Don't think, just do." So he set the tone for what management and leadership was supposed to look like for over 100 years that you don't think, which doesn't pay attention to anything except your ability to do the job. Well, that isn't the way that it needs to be. I mean, we all have issues. We all have our ways of dealing with them. Sometimes they're healthy, sometimes they're not. But as employers, we avoid those issues at our own peril.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, I know that you're a father, and I know that you've been in executive leadership for a while. So I'm curious to ask you about your message to leaders about balancing work and family life and showing up if you're a parent or if you have a leadership role outside of the walls of your workplace. How important it is to find the appropriate balance to be, a great parent or a outside caregiver, and also showing up at work. How do you think we strike that balance effectively, my friend?
There is no balance, Kevin. There is no balance. And to make artificial distinctions between work and life is pretty crazy because you don't leave work when you go to life, and you don't leave life when you go to work, and so it's all life. So it's how you harmonize all of your competing demands, and what's important. If you're raising kids, my goodness, that is the most important thing that you've got to do. However, supporting the family is also really important. And oh, by the way, getting an education and improving your development is extremely important. And oh, by the way, making sure that you're taking care of your health, and fitness is extremely important. So it's how you harmonize all those things. And there are times when the family is going to speak louder than work, and there are times when the work is going to speak louder than the family. But it's then just how do you recalibrate so that you're not only one note. Whenever I ask people what their definition of success is, I don't usually hear just one thing. I
Mm-hmm.
hear five or six things: great family, recognition at work, financial freedom, etc. And so success isn't just one thing, and neither is getting stuck in any one area or not.
Yeah, and I lied. I have one other follow up question that I'm curious to get your thoughts on before I ask you my last question, and that is this. No matter how many degrees you have on a wall or how successful you are in a career, we all deal with career failures and successes. And I'm curious about how you think we can be, positive role models when it comes to dealing with career aspirations, failures, and disappointments, my friend. How do we sort of categorize that to show up as our authentic selves? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, I mean, it's showing up as your authentic self. I mean, that you put the answer right there. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Brene Brown,
Mm-hmm.
but Brene has done a huge amount of work on shame and vulnerability and courage. And I love her work. And the reason I love her work is because um, showing up, being seen, being seen on a full level, that's how we stay authentic. And I'll give you an example. Recently, a CEO that I know very well showed up at one of his offices, and everybody was kind of nervous about the CEO showing up. And when he showed up, he just asked questions, and he asked questions for like 30 minutes about, how did this work and what did this and, how's your family and all that kind of stuff. And what was left was that feeling that he was extremely authentic, because he didn't come in with an agenda. He came in with questions. He came in with, and not why questions, not asking why, because why questions are always blame something, but asking questions about what or how or just being curious. And I think that is probably the biggest trait that as a leader, as a CEO, as someone that is running something, is curiosity. Because when you lose your curiosity, you lose your objectivity. And so, your ability to be curious about things will hold you in really good stead and will help you to be authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chip, my final question is how I end all of my podcasts because I firmly believe that we are all here to what I call etch our fingerprints of difference in the sand in terms of contributing to life. So when life is all said and done for you, my friend, I'm curious, how do you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined?
I just really want to be seen as kind. That's all. I just want to be seen as kind. I don't want to be famous because, fame lasts a little while, but I'm not worried about being rich. I just want to be seen as being kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, my friend, tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the best and most effective way they can do that?
Right. My email is, or my website is scholzassociates.com. You'll probably put that in the show notes.
Yep.
And you can go there and click on books and then what's Chip reading. And there are about 140 books in there that I've read that have reviews on them that I've written. And maybe you'll agree with them, maybe they won't. But if you want a free resource for great books that I've read over the years, about personal development, about strategy, and that kind of thing. They're in there. And then the books. I have Small Decisions, Big Shifts, which came out in October. I've got Every Dog Has Its Day, which just came out about a month ago. And I've got another one called Handoffs that'll come out this fall. They're all available on Amazon and a lot of different audiobook platforms as well.
Well, fabulous, Chip. As someone who is constantly working on leadership development and showing up better for people, I really enjoyed this conversation and I commend you for the work that you do in leadership development. My friend, you're really making a difference in this modern world that we're living in, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon and for being here. It's most appreciated.
Kevin, it was an absolute pleasure, and thank you so very much for reaching out. Thank you for having me on.